listeners, and welcome to another episode of Who Corner to Corner. My name is Paul, and as always, I'm joined by my jolly good tune, Mr. Jeff. Hi, Jeff.
Hi, Paul. How are you today?
Yeah, I'm very good, sir. Very good indeed. And I'm incredibly excited because we are joined by another Doctor Who luminary.
We are.
We are joined by the writer of... I don't want to put any pressure on you, Stephen, but the writer of absolutely one of my all-time, absolute 100% favourite stories of Doctor Who like ever, which is, of course... Terminus. No, Warrior's Gate. It's Warrior's Gate. So, Stephen, welcome to Who Corner to Corner. Delighted to have you here. How are you?
Oh, I'm very well and happy to be out of the house.
What's the weather like where you are? It's rather sunny and slightly warm down here.
It's sunny and lovely. We've got sheep in the field across the lane. So if you hear a banging and clanging in the background, that's them at the food plot.
Well, they're building a new one and a whole kind of cityscape and everything else to go with it, aren't they? The sheep have evolved, ladies and gentlemen. Brilliant. So thank you, Stephen, for joining us. As I said, now we've got a whole bunch of questions which we're going to ask you. Some of these, Jeff and I have kind of put our heads together and come up with ourselves, but we also enlisted the help of some of our loyal Twitter followers as well to kind of pitch in, because Warrior's Gate, I think, is one of those stories which has a very loyal kind of dedicated following. I don't mean that in a scary sense, but it's a style of story which is really unique in the worlds of Doctor Who, and I don't think anything ever before or since has really kind of come close to it. But we'll talk about that in a second, but what I would really like to know, and of course the fans are asking, is if you can take us back to the very start. When did you decide to become a writer, and how did you go about doing it?
Oh, we're talking about the age of about 6 now. When I first started, writing stories for my parents, because I wasn't, I didn't have school friends who could read. And I remember the very first story I wrote was about a ghost going to ghost school and not knowing the rules. And and I drew the pictures and everything. Wow. And for years, I just kept doing the same thing. And it was spotted by my primary school teacher who my parents kept my school reports, and I was looking through them the other day, and actually, I was looking through my dad's because I wanted something I could hold him to account over. And his were way worse than mine. But my primary school teacher picked up on the fact that I had an unusual talent for English, which is counterbalanced by a terrible talent for maths. And nothing's changed in that respect. So, but he kind of spotted that and encouraged me. And I do remember that while everybody else had a rough book that once a week, you had to write a little story in, and people would write kind of 2 or 3 paragraphs of a tale. And I was given a special separate book, and I started a novel.
Because why not? Why wouldn't you?
I was about 8 or 9 by then, and I just carried on with the same story, continuously through. So, I mean, I look back and I'm grateful for the backing and the recognition that I got back then, and the encouragement that I got, because every kid needs encouragement, and it doesn't take a lot to kind of put you off, or if your peers don't support you, or if they ridicule you for what you do. But the great thing about storytelling was that it kind of drew my peers in. So I would, still at primary school, I was organising them for plays, and we would put shows on, and that kind of continued through secondary school. I remember I was asked to write the teacher's pantomime one year, so all my bad carry-on jokes went into that, and writing for magazines. From quite an early age, I was submitting to magazines as well. There was a kids' comic called The Wizard, which was the last of the old story papers, where the stories were purely prose with the occasional illustration, as opposed to comic strips. And I fastened on that quite early, and I submitted to that. Drew my own pictures to go with it on lined paper, completely unusable, and the thing itself was unpublishable. But I got this really nice reply from the editor saying, keep at it. We can't use this one, but do keep at it, because you obviously you enjoy it, and you have a bent for it. So, and that, was the foundation of the whole thing. I started and I've never stopped.
Did you get a story published in that in the end in Wizard?
No, I never did. The magazine, it got absorbed into the Rover and became another comic strip magazine. I think they had one prose feature for a while, but the days of the old story papers were long gone. But I did sign up for a magazine called Collector's Digest, which via Sexton Blake, because I was a big Sexton Blake fan when I was a kid. I used to buy the old paperbacks off the stall on Eccles Market second hand, and there was an ad in the back of them for the Old Boys Book Club.
The Old Boys Book Club.
At the age of the Old Boys Book, and grand. I was about 11. It does, and it was all these people who in the kind of 20s and 30s had been readers of the Magnet and the Gem, the old Greyfriars stories and stuff like that. And Sexton Blake had been going since the 1890s as a back feature in a lot of these magazines. So so I joined up and I bought some of the old issues from collectors who were advertising in the back of this. It was a Roneoed magazine, it was an amateur magazine typed out and gestetnered and stapled, and I've still got the copies somewhere. And those copies that I bought some copies of the Halfpenny Marvel and a comic called The Dread Norton Boys War Weekly from 1914.
Wow.
And when about a decade ago I turned to doing a couple of historical novels, they were the sources that I drew on. And I tried to replicate the spirit of those gung-ho stories from a century ago, but with a kind of modern sensibility, because obviously they were empire based, they were terribly racist, they were sexist, and everything that you could think of that could be wrong with them was wrong with them, but they did have a terrific kind of storytelling energy. So it kind of felt there as if I was coming full circle.
Interesting. So and a lot of your stories have had a kind of supernatural or suspense or horror sci-fi kind of bent to them. Has that always been the case, or have you kind of, I know you've dabbled in various other things, but has the kind of genre stuff been a specific influence on you? Is that what you always wanted to write?
Your earliest stuff was about ghost school there, so maybe.
Which Jeff likes. Jeff likes.
Well,
I quite often say, Stephen, on the podcast, I'd love a really good spooky Doctor Who story. So that's it's one of the things I really like.
Oh, it's funny you mention that, because my son-in-law was up at Christmas and he just picked up the Sylvester McCoy set with Ghostlight on it. And I hadn't seen Ghostlight, so we put it on, and I absolutely loved it. I thought it was great, and I was not I was not really watching the show around that time, because I've had a long career, and I've had a long association with Doctor Who, and I've dipped in and out over the years. I'm not part of core fandom, I've got to say, and anyone who is a true fan of Doctor Who can run rings around me when it comes to the lore and the knowledge of the show. But I really love Ghostlight. I thought it was terrific,
that's a good one.
And that, I think, kind of that ticks many of the spooky boxes that you were talking about. But I grew up reading science fiction and ghost stories, and one of my earliest formative texts was the complete stories of H.G. Wells in a big fat volume published by Ben. And the funny thing is, writers of my generation, whenever I would go into their houses, I would usually see one or other of those formative books, whether it was the H.G. Wells complete short stories or the Professor Challenger stories was another one. I would see them on their bookshelves as well. That and the Dennis Gifford Guide to Horror Movies. and
I never heard of that. Right?
And these were my formative influences. That and Famous Monsters of Filmland Mad Magazine, all that kind of thing, swirling together. So when I started writing professionally, I was like a kid in a toy shop. I do have this theory that we start out by writing what we love, and then we discover ourselves through that. You unconsciously or unintentionally add something of yourself along the way, and the trick is to spot out of what I've just done. What are my influences and what's me? Because what's me is the thing that is going to carry me forward. So yeah, I was from the get-go, I was doing science fiction, I was doing horror, and then I kind of discovered me in that, and I didn't go away from the genre, but I started suppressing the genre a little bit, because I always remember in his book on not the On Writing book, but the early one, Dance Macabre, Stephen King, which was a series of essays or lectures on writing. He wrote about Psycho, and he was writing about the werewolf in fiction, but he was offering Norman Bates as an example of the werewolf.
Interesting. And
he said, he doesn't transform or anything, but what you suspect is that Norman Bates is the werewolf on the inside all the time. And I thought, well, that's terrific, because it means you can write the monster without having to write the monster. And so with books like kind of Downriver, Rain, Nightmare with Angel, I didn't move out of horror, but I did move into crime and kind of took horror with me. And I like to think that from that point onwards, I was writing books that only, a born horror writer could write, but they weren't necessarily horror genre.
Yeah. It's quite interesting, because I think with a lot of crime stories, you are delving into a very human horror, aren't you? You're diving into the darkest part of human psyche, and that's where all the monsters live. That's where the real monsters come from.
Yep.
And I think picking through the kind of the more sort of outrageous, or the most obviously horror aspects of the genre, inserting that into crime, I think can be really, really effective.
Yeah, and I mean, actually, because the area is the human subconscious, which is the most fascinating and interesting area, and I think that's where ultimately all art lives. And in a book called October, I actually kind of made the human subconscious a territory, into which our main character could cross, and in which the souls of the dead were still waiting and interacting with the souls of the living. That's about as overt as I ever got, but yeah, I mean, and the other thing, of course, is that kid in a toy shop. I just wanted to play in all media, all parts of the, and I've kind of got away with it. I started in radio, and then I did novels, and then I got into TV. I've written film screenplays, never had a feature film, and I don't regret that, because writers get quite badly treated in features. You're quite disposable. And I have written for theatre, but not very well. So I'll admit that straight up.
But I mean, that's an extraordinary broad range of media that you've been working in, isn't it? And I think to have enjoyed a successful career where you can play in the toy box that you that you love so much has got to be really something. And for people sort of starting out on writing and who want to make a career of it, is there any sort of advice that you might, any nuggets of wisdom, if you like, which you could provide?
It's tricky, because it's a different world to when I started out. I was starting out at a time when you could write a script and send it to the editor of Saturday Night Theatre at Radio 4 and get an invite down and a tour of the studios and a commission out of it, which is what I got. And this was without much in the way of prior experience at all. But prior to that, I had got together with mates, and we'd done a series for independent local radio. We all had kind of a particular set of skills that we all put together. There was some actors, there was a radio commercials producer, there was a radio DJ who could operate the desk, and me with my very kind of rudimentary and early writing talent. We all got together and we made this show. And I suppose the advice I would have to give was, get together with your peers and do something. And then on the basis of that gives you a platform to launch into whatever else the world is offering at that time, whatever opportunities are being offered. Because the opportunities that were there for me are not the opportunities that are there today. And the opportunities that are there today are not necessarily opportunities that I could take. I've been in this business quite a long time, and I think I've been in it, I've managed in it for long enough that I can say I've sort of, I've pulled it off. If it was taken away from me today, I could still say, well, but I've still won.
There's a body of work in your training.
You've got a career in it,
Yeah, and that, that's the body of work that if I started again right now, give me the youth and give me the energy, I couldn't replicate it. I would be doing something else altogether. So that's kind of then, this is now. But I would say and it's easier
but
now.
It's in many ways.
It's easier to get together with your mates and do
just,
something.
if you want to make films, use your phone, or you can write on your iPad, and it is easier in many ways to do stuff, but to get it seen and to there's more competition in some ways. Like you said, the way things were for you, it's different these days. And my advice to filmmakers is just get out there and do it. Get together with your friends, get out there and do it. Because if you don't, you're never taking that chance, and you'll never get any opportunities if you just continue to be an aspiring filmmaker, as you often see online, and wannabe writer and things. So just get out there and do it.
That's how Shane Meadows did it. He got together with mates, and this was at a point where I think the earliest handycams were coming into the market. When I was kicking off, then it was like Super 8. And most of it was silence. The great thing about that, of course, was that you could do something and not be very good at it, and nobody could see it, because
you didn't feel.
whereas now, if you do something and it's not very good, you put it out there proudly, and the whole world sees it,
and everyone's got an opinion on it.
Then you have that.
Wants to let you know it.
So there is a disadvantage as well as an advantage to all of that. I mean, my calling card for quite a while was a terrible 16mm film that I'd made. And what was impressive was the fact that I'd made a film in 16mm, not the film itself, because nobody ever saw the film, because they weren't going to thread up a projector and sit and watch it. But, this guy's done 16mm. He must be at a certain level of competence. Not true, but,
I had that many years ago, and I made a film as well, and it was an hour-long film, and people didn't watch it. I'd send DVD copies out, but it was exactly like you just said, Stephen. The fact that I'd done something, and written it and produced it, and the whole thing, and that then opened some doors for me, because people could see that you were serious about it and committed to it. So it's get out there and do it. Yeah.
I mean, we've all got that mate who'll tell you the story of, how, he would have been a filmmaker now if it wasn't for the fact that, somebody did him down at some point, or somebody didn't turn up. And the thing is, that knockbacks on a daily basis are part of the field. Every knockback, So, the advice I always give is, you've got to learn to bounce. Bounce back from everything. Take everything bad that happens to you and see what opportunity lies in it, because I had one of these questions the other day. If you could go back again and tell your young self, or warn your young self of something, what would you do? And I said nothing. I would not change a thing, because every good experience I've had has been somehow a consequence of every bad experience I've had. Every bad experience has led to a good one, either by denying me an opportunity that would have taken me down a different road, or by opening up an opportunity that I never expected.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, but I think you're right. I think it's go out and do it, and be resilient, grow a thick skin, because you are going to take some negatives, some knockbacks, as you said, but just go out and do it. I think that's the biggest thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I was talking to a producer yesterday about a project that we started in 2014, and which has been on and off and knocked back, and COVID was, lockdown was the biggest knockback for it. We were about to board a plane to New Zealand to scout locations in May 2020, and we all know what happened in New Zealand in May 2020. They closed. So the whole thing kind of died on its arse, and has recently just raised itself again. And again, it's a case of bounce back. The thing itself has evolved hugely in that time. But it's active again, and I said to him, the point of all this is you've got to enjoy the process. I have enjoyed the last 9 years or whatever it is of working on this, pushing it along a bit, coming up with ideas to push it along, making new contacts, having great lunches, great boozy lunches down in
always important
down in their headquarters, and you've got to enjoy that process, because if all you live for is the end result, then you're spending most of your life on tenterhooks and unhappy. If it's only the end result that's going to make you happy. Whereas I actually love the whole process from start to finish, and I've enjoyed myself as much on projects that didn't get made, almost as much as on the ones that do. Although, of course, when the thing does get made, then that takes it over into a certain other territory.
We'll come to that.
Let's not talk that down.
We'll come to that in a second. Actually. So going back to Doctor Who, then, I mean, you kind of mentioned that you wouldn't call yourself a massive core fan or anything like that. It's okay. We can forgive that. But you must have been aware of Doctor Who before you got the commission to write Warriors Gate. So what are your sort of earliest memories of Doctor Who?
Oh God, yeah. A viewer from the Hartnell years. I used to go up to my grandmother's place because she had a TV that could get BBC. I was going to say BBC One,
it was
but
just BBC, wasn't it?
Then. Yeah. And the word had gone round the playground that there was this fantastic new show that everybody was doing Daleks. There was no kind of buzz about Doctor Who until the Daleks came along, and then suddenly it was, oh my God, what's this show? Got to get to Grandma's and see it. And then I persuaded my dad to jerry-rig the TV we had at home to get BBC One, because it had a faulty switch on it and it would only get ITV.
You poor soul.
Yeah.
We was poor, but we was honest.
Was it one of those dial TVs? Did you have one of those? We used to have one of them, actually.
It had a kind of,
so it wasn't like a button. It was like you tune it in like a radio
yeah.
on an old dial or something.
Yeah, it had kind of clicky positions, and the clicky position for BBC One didn't work. So my dad had to sculpt a pencil to jam the switch into the right place for BBC One.
That's creative, isn't it?
Oh, the BBC.
The BBC,
I should say.
The British Broadcasting Corporation.
Kids today don't realise how easy they've got it, do they?
Oh, they've got it easy, Jeff.
Yeah.
They don't even have to press buttons each day. Just swipe it on an app, don't they? That's all they got to do, mate. I'll tell you. Oh.
Yeah. All that, and then I was looking at the TV last night and thinking, picture's not as good as an OLED. Is it time to upgrade?
Is it indeed? So how did the commission for Warriors Gate come about then? Because you've been professionally published at that time, hadn't you? I think you were a recognised talent, so to speak.
Well, I was off the ground. Yeah, I'd been. I think by then I'd published Chimera. I'd certainly published tie-in novels with the radio serials that I'd done at independent local radio, and I'd done a string of Saturday night theatres for BBC Radio 4. And the latest one of them was a thing called An Alternative to Suicide, which was a science fiction play, and the lead in that was played by Michael Jaston.
Oh, okay.
And it was great because I got to meet up again with Michael at Gallifrey One in Los Angeles.
Because he played the Valeyard,
not last year, but the year before. That's right, yeah. And that was terrific. And Martin Jenkins, who was the producer of the radio play, sent the script over to the Doctor Who office and said, "You should be taking a look at this guy." So I got a call to go in and have a meeting with Chris Bidmead, who introduced me to John Nathan Turner. And I got introduced to Tom, who was passing through the building. This was Threshold House on Shepherd's Bush Green, which was the most unsalubrious and uncreative feeling office block that you possibly could imagine. It was like kind of 1950s East Germany. in
Brutalist architecture.
And but out of that came, Chris asked me to do some pictures, so I came up with a story called At the Time the Dream Time, and that became Warriors Gate. And what I had to do was mesh my concept with the whole kind of E-space where they were in the season, which actually worked really well because the Dream Time was all about crossing through barriers into another form of reality, which is where the white space came from in Warriors.
The void.
So, on the basis of a one-page pitch, which just had 4 paragraphs, 1 paragraph per half hour, I got commissioned to do a treatment, which was an expanded version of that, and on the basis of the treatment, I got launched to script. as they say.
So, excuse me. And was it quite prescriptive in some ways in that? So, sorry, what I mean is, did you have the shopping list of, right, so it's got the N space, E space, the end of that kind of trilogy. We've got Romana, the Doctor's companion, leaving. We've got to get rid of K9. And we've somehow got we've got a new companion, Adric, who was only introduced a couple of stories ago, so we don't know much about his, about who he is and all the rest of it. And we've also got to boot the Doctor back into the normal universe. Was that shopping list there from the outset, or was that kind of thrown at you as it went?
That was exactly it. No, you've said it exactly. That was. I've made the comparison before of there is a big empty room and with a door at either end, and you walk in through one door and you walk out through the other. And when you walk in through the entrance, you're handed a certain amount of luggage, and when you go out the other door, you have to have a certain amount of different luggage with you. And how you swap the luggage in between times is entirely up to you. As long as you pick up what you're given to start with, and you hand over what you have to hand over at the end. So that was great because you need something to play against. It's like playing squash. You need a wall to bounce things off.
Yes.
So so my large room analogy here is being stretched a little bit. So it's now a squash court.
Again, an example of how these things evolve.
Yeah. But it gives you it gives you things to work with, and it gives you things to spark your imagination. There is nothing worse than just being told, "Oh, do anything." What do you want from me? Oh, we want anything.
And you're staring at a blank page.
I mean, Brian Clemens, who I used to, who I got to work with later in life. When he was working for the Danziger brothers on kind of quota quickies in the 1950s, they would have a bunch of sets and some props and a couple of actors with a little bit left on their contracts, and they would say to Brian Clemens, "Look, we've got Dermot Walsh and Hazel Court for 8 days. We've got a courtroom set and we've got a submarine. Can you do us something around that?" So and Clemens would go off and do it. And Clemens, I've got to say, is my writing hero. And it was a huge honour for me to share a credits screen with him on Bugs, and he wrote the introduction to my first collection of short stories as well, and that I learned quite early on from the likes of him to juggle with what you've got and to try and make magic with it.
So the process from script to screen in Warriors Gate, by all accounts, seems to have been slightly difficult. I'm trying to find a polite way to put it. I mean, from a production perspective, as much as anything else, with Paul Joyce kind of getting fired and rehired, and all kinds of shenanigans going on there. What was it like from your experience? So this was your first TV script, wasn't it? I think.
It was,
so
yes.
How did it...
and the last for a while as well.
It scar you for life in some way. Was it an interesting learning experience?
Yeah, it was. I mean, it wasn't that horrendous for me because I wrote and I rewrote and I rewrote. I got notes and I rewrote, and then finally handed the thing over. And all of the crap hitting the fan happened from that point onwards. So... And this is the thing about being a writer in British TV at that time, and to a certain extent it still persists to this day, is that you're an outsider to the production process. You're a piece worker from whom they buy the story, and then they do their thing with it. And what had happened with me was I'd got continuous feedback and notes from Chris. I'd done several drafts, and my understanding was that the last one that I handed in was ready to go to the studio floor. It wasn't, because bear in mind, my experience before this had been in radio, and the sensibility of a radio script and a TV script. A TV script, they ask very little of you. The page asks very little of you. The least you can put on the page, the better it is. So the world building that I was used to in radio was too much for a TV script. So after it left my hands and I thought everything was fine, Paul and Chris, Paul Joyce, Chris Bidmead, between them kind of took it to pieces and reassembled it as a shooting script, which at first glance I barely recognised. In the meantime, of course, I'd gone off and written the novelisation.
Oh, right, you'd already done that,
I'd done that. Yeah. I was quite young and I was full of energy.
Yeah.
You know, I wouldn't be quite so quick off the mark now. But bang, bang, bang. You know, the stuff was coming out. So what then happened was that we had kind of two distinct versions of Warriors Gate, and production office, mainly in the person of John Nathan Turner, wouldn't okay the novelisation in its current form because the TV script had been, you know, rearranged to a great extent. So I then had to do a massacre job on my own manuscript to make the novelisation conform more to the TV version. And as a result of that, this kind of myth of the lost version of the novelisation took hold. Not encouraged by me to any great extent, at least not until later years when I realised it was a thing. But unfortunately, I'd kept all the bits. So the idea of reconstructing the lost novelisation was never it was never out of the question, but I was rather hoping that somebody else would do it. And after about 30 years, I bit the bullet and did it myself. Yeah. So that's how we have the republication today. But all of the you know, the production stuff, it went on after it left my hands. So other people suffered way more than I did. I was just miffed when I kind of saw how little of what I'd done actually made it onto the screen. And I was miffed for a little while, and I was quite prickly if the subject came up. And then as the years went by, of course, and I had other credits to my name, and I had a career elsewhere, and Doctor Who was not the only thing that I could hope to be known for, then it kind of fell into perspective, and I became a lot more sanguine about the whole thing, to the extent that I'm so laid back these days that you have to prod me to make sure I'm awake.
Is he still going?
Wake up.
So I remember reading an interview with you, and I think it was in a magazine called Interzone, which was a collection of sci-fi short stories. I don't know if you remember that, but I remember reading it, and I thought, oh my goodness, it sounds horrific, because I think the interview was all focused on the negative stuff, and and it was quite close to the production time as well. So it might have been when you were more prickly towards it, and I think the interview had obviously kind of pulled that out and made this great feature of it. But it was an interesting eye opener into how a script can change so much from what it is. But the thing that got me when I sort of came to it a bit later on and understood a bit more about the, like you were saying about Chris Bidmead and Paul Joyce sort of going away and reworking it, but clearly they were really excited by and seemed to get creatively inspired by what you'd originally written. So it's almost like they kind of took it off in their own sort of direction, but still using everything that you'd given them. So it kind of breathes its own life in a way.
Oh, they did a terrific job, and once the indignation years were
the
over,
indignation
then I
years.
could recognise
I love
that. Yeah, and from the perspective of today, everybody involved deserves all the credit they deserve, and I recently did, and I'm not quite sure when this will be coming out, but I recently did a commentary with Matthew Waterhouse and with Graham on this, and it'll be out on a DVD that you can either watch along with the show or you can just listen to it, as an audio thing.
Yeah, definitely.
And some of the sort of backstory that other people knew that I didn't came out, and that, so I learned a lot in the course of that.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because again, it's a creative thing of so many people, isn't it? Obviously the director and Chris Bidmead and the actors doing their thing, and the lighting guys, cameras, and everything else. And it's, I must say, it's one of those things where, I mean, for me personally, Warriors Gate was one of those stories that, I mean, I'd been aware of Doctor Who. I'd read a whole load of Target novels, when I was at primary school and sort of junior school growing up, and I'd seen a bit of Doctor Who through the 70s. But when this season, which is season 18, came out, my dad always switched over the TV to watch Buck Rogers and specifically Wilma Deering. So which is very kind of
Eric Gray.
Exactly, which is all very kind of glamorous and exciting and flashbang whistles. And then on the other side, you've got Warriors Gate, which looks so different to anything like that. But for me personally, when I think I maybe caught episode 2 or 3 or something, so I hadn't seen it from the start. But I remember being absolutely entranced entranced by what I was seeing on TV, because the visual aspect, rather than the actual story or any of the sort of hard concepts underneath it, was what really grabbed my attention. And the idea of that kind of almost, that really surreal juxtaposition of the privateer spaceship, the police box TARDIS, and this gate, this gothic arch in the middle of a white void was just. I was just absolutely. I was more excited by that than Erin Grey. If I'd have been a few years older, that might have been slightly different. But for me, as a very raw 10-year-old at that time, it was astonishing, and that sort of began or boosted my kind of engagement with the program thereafter, because I thought, well, now I'm going to really sit down and watch it, because I'd only ever caught things, and I wasn't sort of subscribed to it. So Warriors Gate really gave me the kind of boost of that. And for such a concept heavy story, whether it's in print or on screen, you kind of think that would be quite unusual perhaps in some ways, but it did. And I know from engaging with other fans that I'm not alone in that respect. There are others like that. So sorry, I just had to say that, because it's
thank you.
It's quite an influential story on me, if you like. So
yeah, and it's the product of all the talents that went into it, not just me. I mean, and in places where maybe it doesn't immediately make obvious sense, because the logic is there, but it's not easy to grasp.
Have to work at it.
It does make a.
But I love that,
and it makes a poetic sense all the way through. And that is it's a combination of sound, vision, concept, choices. Everything kind of works together. And at the time, it wasn't huge. It wasn't well loved, I don't think, in the very early days. I mean, I didn't get a lot of fan feedback then, because I'd kind of moved onward. But its reputation seems to have grown and grown since, and it has far higher standing now than it did when it first went out.
Very possibly, yeah. And I think it's. I mean, for me again, it's like I liken it to the Blade Runner movie and the novelisation Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep by Philip K. Dick. They're two very distinct beasts. They're two very distinct products, if you like, about the same themes. They cover exactly the same themes, and they have the same sort of characters, and things happen. The incidents are approximately the same, but there are obvious differences. But when you look at them, they come across as very different. The book is way more nihilistic even than the movie. And the movie's quite nihilistic, but it's actually quite optimistic in its way. But they deal with the same thing.
Good old Phil.
But then when you bring the two together, so you read the book and you watch the movie, and it's exactly the same with Warriors Gate. You read the book of Warriors Gate and you watch the TV series, and the two kind of combine to create a third piece, which takes takes everything from both. Because I mean, I remember reading the original Warriors Gate novel years ago, and actually when I got to watching the TV series again later on, I thought I'd remembered stuff from the TV series, but actually it's from the book. But what I'd learned from the book, and specifically the stuff about the flipping of the coin and how it kind of taps into or represents a sample of the the sort of patterns in the universe, which we might call random, but which aren't random, but they only seem to be random because we can't see the full scale model that they dip into. But then with E-Space being a much smaller universe, it's much easier to kind of I loved all that stuff. Sorry, I'm just going to shut up for a minute, because I can but that's it. It's like the thinking behind it as well. I mean, I love Doctor Who for its humour and its outrageousness, and quite often for its campness, and and its and all of that stuff. But when it gets really cerebral, like in Warriors Gate and Ghostlight, like you mentioned as well, and stories like that, I could watch them over and over and over and over. They're the ones that really get me. But I understand, for some fans, it's not what they're after. The great thing about Doctor Who, of course, it can take all of those ideas.
Do all of it, yeah.
Oh, indeed, yeah. I mean, it is the ultimate kind of do anything, go anywhere show. All you need is your police box, your doctor, a human or other companion for the doctor to bounce off, and somewhere for them to go. And it can be anywhere in human history. It can be anywhere in the universe.
It's creatively unlimited.
In any other universe. And it always comes back to the same point where when you go out the door at the other side of the big room, you've got the doctor, somebody to bounce off, and the police box.
None of what you went into it with, and you come out with something else. There's a question here. So Warriors Gate was published under the pen name of John Lydecker. So and Terminus as well. Where did that name come from?
Oh, right. I get asked this a lot. So you know, if you're listening to this, forgive me if I give the same explanation again. But the reason for doing it in the first place was because I wanted to kind of distinguish between my novel writing and my novelization writing, because the two are very different forms. The novelization I just saw as a commercial thing which was beholden to the thing it was based on, whereas a novel is, you know, an expression of the novelist's own creativity, to put it a bit poncily. But that's why I did it, and I took the name Lydecker, John Lydecker, from the radio play An Alternative to Suicide, which had got me the gig in the first place, and for that I took it from Howard and Theodore Lydecker, who were the two brothers who worked for Republic Serials in the 1940s, doing the special effects that made Captain Marvel fly. And then in the 1960s they worked on Irwin Allen TV shows, so they were the ones who did the Seaview in Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea.
Brilliant.
So the Lydecker brothers gave me the name for the radio play, and I took the name from the radio play for novelising. And I did a couple of other things under the Lydecker name, and then I reached the point where I thought, this is so I stopped doing it.
That's a great story.
Good intentions, though. I didn't. Do you know what? I've never heard that story before. So for me, at least, it's brand new.
I didn't.
So
well, there you go. There you go.
Thanks, Stephen.
Paul, we had a couple of questions from Mark Lynch on Twitter, didn't we? He actually asked that one, didn't he? But what was his other one that he asked?
His other one was, hold on a second, let me find it. Right, so he says, yes, okay, so Mark's questions. He asks, do you believe a novelisation should enlarge on the filmed or televised manuscripts? So again, going back to what you're saying about John Nathan Turner maybe not signing off the original version he did. And also the second question is, Warriors Gate sees the first appearance of the Tharrells. Are you sad that they've not appeared in Doctor Who since?
Well, hello, Mark. Yeah, and I suspect you may know the answer to this already because we follow each other on Twitter. But yes, I do believe that a novelisation is something that should expand upon and provide extra dimensions to, and provide a kind of interior experience, which the TV doesn't. You know, the TV is something you observe, whereas the novelisation is something you experience. When I was a kid, I was a big fan of a writer called John Burke, who seemed to get all the novelising gigs that were going at the time. And I remember his novelisations of The Champions. Oh, there was a guy called Peter Leslie who ghosted a couple of Avengers novelisations that went out under Patrick McNee's name. And the really, really good ones that stuck with me were the ones that added to the experience of the TV. They weren't just a record of it. I mean, bear in mind that this was pre-VHS, any other way of re-experiencing a show that you loved. So the novelizations were more or less the only way that you could kind of keep that sense of connection. But even so, it was always a big thrill when you got into a novelization where it took you a bit further than the TV had ever done. So yeah, I do believe that, and that's why I was a bit dismayed when JNT wouldn't okay the novelization, because of the very experience that you just described. I was trying to bring that to the reader, something that went above and beyond the TV show and complemented the TV show, and when you put the two together, were a bigger experience than just either of them on its own.
That's one of the big things. Of the Target books, isn't it? They always expand and deepen the stories. And,
well, they don't always. That's the thing. Some do,
really?
Some don't. A lot of them are literally just straight copies, which is another thing entirely, I suppose. But I suppose it's which is best. And I kind of go with what you're saying, Stephen. It's that it allows for a greater experience. One that gives you an alternative to just watching it on the TV, and which actually, when you do watch it with the TV, brings the whole thing together.
Yeah, it moves off the screen and inside your head. And the second part of Mark's question, did I wish more had been done with the Tharals? Well, I'll tell you what really annoyed me. I never got an action figure.
No.
You know,
Sort that out right now. Character options.
Yeah. Well, you see, I've raised my game now because I don't just want to see an action figure. I want to see a chess set.
Ooh.
You know,
That would be good.
with Tharals and Gundams. Yeah. And all the pawns are human.
Yeah, you're gonna have Rolvik's crew as there as some people in there, couldn't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, and the Gundam Tharals.
Yeah, so there you go. Yeah, but no, but yeah, you know, and I think this is a loaded question from Mark, because Mark knows full well that Cutaway Comics are now doing Faustine, Princess of Tharal, which you can probably see the cover on the wall behind me here. It's not the finished cover. That's the kind of preliminary ad from Martin Geraghty's art. But yeah, I mean that's coming out around the same time as the novelisation, and I don't know if you know the situation, but prior to New Who, when in Classic Who, all the writers who contributed got to keep the copyrights of anything that they brought in. So if you created a villain or you created a character for Doctor Who, you kept the copyright in that, because the BBC could not be asked to do a deal over it because they thought it wasn't important. They think differently now, I've got to say. But yeah. But this is how Terry Nation kept the Daleks, and you know, K9 is owned by Bob Baker,
Dave Martin,
and the Cybermen. Yeah. So they had to do deals with the creators in order to bring them back from New Who. I never got approached for Tharals or Gundams or anything, so that never became an issue. But Gareth Kavanagh, who he was the landlord of the Lasagowrie pub in Manchester, and he used to run Doctor Who events there, and it became a kind of hub for Doctor Who fandom in Manchester, and it was a glorious time. I went to a few things that he put on there, and eventually he was so successful that the brewery booted him out. But Gareth being Gareth, he was looking for new ventures, and he organised a few things, and his latest thing is a comics company, Cutaway Comics, where he approached several of the creators of Classic Who, me included, and said, would you like to expand upon your particular owned part of the expanded universe? And I said, okay. So I came up with Faustine. Don't know where the name came from. Just sort of seemed to be there, waiting to be discovered. And she's a female Tharal, and she is snatched from the Gateway, and is an experimental subject in the Human Rebellion.
Okay.
Which is referred to in the because at one point Tharals kept humans as slaves. Yeah. The humans created the Gundams with their armour of Dwarf Star alloy, which allowed them to subjugate the Tharals and make them slaves in return. Which is the situation we start Warrior's Gate with, because the privateer is a slave ship with a hold full of enslaved Tharals, and we have back references in Warrior's Gate to. And we see little snatches of it through the Gateway of the human uprising, and so all of this is taking place. The comic story is taking place kind of off stage during the human uprising in Warrior's Gate. It's a little bit like that Star Trek Next Generation story where they intercut a present day story with the Trouble with Tribbles.
Yes,
and and they had footage from the original, and new footage of what was happening just around the corner with the people who you couldn't see in the. Well, we don't have the original, but we just have. We just have the stuff that I own.
Yes, that's brilliant. I mean, I must admit, actually, just on the side there, I love those Cutaway Comics. I've got a few. I've got this one here, which is Lytton, using Eric Saber's character.
That's Eric.
There's a few more as well, and I would recommend to anybody go out and get them, because they are absolutely brilliant. And I will definitely be getting Faustine as well, because I think there's a lot to be told about the Tharals, and like you're saying, but there's a lot of conflict in that particular part of their story, isn't there, with the uprising and the switch of the whole slave and the master's kind of role. And actually thinking about that, this is another theme in Warriors Game, which I hadn't thought of, but there's an awful lot of inversions of those types of reversals, isn't there? Because, I mean, even just using the physical aspects of the mirrors and travelling through the mirrors, and oh my God, it's brilliant. Honestly, the more I think about this, it's such a good story. Go off, no, but keep to the script, Paul. Keep to the script. No, it's fine. So that's out very shortly, is it, Faustine?
It is. It's at the printers now, and it was done as a Kickstarter. So there are various things that need to be assembled for the stretch goals, because we went way beyond the target. So we now got to deliver on the stretch goals. One of the stretch goals, as I recall, was if you went in for one of the levels, you will get the scripts, the original scripts that went off from me before Chris and Paul did their thing on them. So you'd be able to do your own academic investigation of what the differences are. And the disc I was talking about before, where Graham Harper and Matthew Waterhouse and I talked through all the episodes, and Graham sort of explains exactly what his role in supporting Paul in the direction was. Of course. That's going to be one of the extras as well that comes along with Faustine. So you'll be able to sort of catch up with that.
And that's on the Kickstarter page, is it? Have we got a link to that somewhere?
I'm
just looking at their website now, actually, but
I think they're pushing at getting it out there. So there are no details up at the moment because we don't know quite how soon we'll be able to deliver on that. But on the original Kickstarter page, you've got all that stuff. And I just heard from Gareth yesterday. There were a couple of things, a couple of setbacks with sort of a bit of illness along the way from people who were contributing to it that just held us up a couple of months. Otherwise, it would have been out last year. But everything is done and on course now, and it's looking great. I've got to say, I got the lettered, coloured pages in about 2-3 weeks ago now for approval.
That's exciting.
And signed off on them, and so they're off at the printers. And I did a 3,000 word interview for the text pages in there, where I cover stuff that I don't cover today, and I cover stuff today that I didn't cover in that. So you're on good ground there.
Fantastic. Oh, I'll definitely be in with that one. That's for sure. I really will. Does it ever get old, the feeling of seeing your work in print realised or on screen? Is that?
No, never does. No. It's like it's the cherry on the cake as much as anything. Much as I enjoy the process, every now and again. And I had a little exchange with the producer of Lockwood and Co. Rachel Pryor, executive producer, and this was before Netflix decided, it's we like it, it's a success, we love it, but we're not doing any more. And that's logic that's hard to fathom. But
sense, does it?
When it came out and when you saw the reception of it and how well it went down and how well it had turned out, Rachel was buzzing with that, and I said, a couple of those in the course of a career and you can say you've won at life. And she fired back a message, says, "You totally get it." She said. So you do need those little highs every now and again to make put the rest of it in context.
And actually that's a good lead into the next question. Actually, talking about the reworking of Warriors Gate as a new Target novel. So I think did you say you'd had the idea to kind of rework it before then, and it kind of all fell into place with what Target Books wanted, or was it a pitch from them to you?
The idea floated around, and it was Gareth Kavanagh again who gave me the latest nudge. Prior to that, Matt Hills had held on to the envelope of cuttings for a while, but hadn't been able to actually buckle down to it, and so he regretfully had to pass it back. Gareth was going to do it, and he was the one who first approached Target, and Target were tied up at the time with a bunch of new stuff that was coming out, and couldn't consider it. And then last year, it crossed my mind, because in the meantime BBC Audio said, well, if Target don't want it, we'll have it. So as a result of that, I actually buckled down to it and did the reassembly. And in fact, it's just as well I did, because I knew stuff that other people wouldn't. So
Yeah.
where others might have struggled, I had a slightly easier job of
yeah.
it. But it slotted back together, really nicely. And John Coleshaw did the audio reading for that, which was the next best thing to having Tom himself doing it. John Leeson came in and did K9. Excuse me one second while take a sip. The throat's going dry there. So John Leeson came in and did K9, and then of course I had the reassembled book there. So I thought, well, in the meantime, I'd also done a 10,000 word novella for BBC Audio on what happened to Romana straight after Warrior's Gate. I thought, well, it would be kind of nice to see that in print as well. So I pitched that to Target and said, look, I know a couple of years ago you weren't able to do this. Is it off the table now, or are you still maybe open to it? And they came back and said, oh, we're very much open to it.
Yeah.
And I think they'd got the is it 5 novelizations they'd got lined up for the it was the 50th anniversary of Target and the 60th of the show, and they added Warrior's Gate to the existing ones. And so I kind of I joined the parade when the parade was already up and running, so I sneaked in there. But no, it turned out the timing was good. So and I'm really happy with the way it's all turned out.
I think it's really good. Again, it's weird because it's a long time since I read the original Warrior's Gate novelisation, so I'm reading this one. I'm thinking, well, there doesn't actually seem to be an awful lot of difference, really. But there is. But it's because I was going to read the original one again, but I thought, no, I just don't have time for that, right? To be honest, to read 2 novels back to back, right? But I kind of dipped into a few bits. I thought, okay, so that bit is actually slightly different. So it's for me, I think that actually is one of the best kind of expansions, is where you don't see where the changes are. Everything just flows kind of nicely, and it is very fluid. I mean, there's no chapter titles in there, which always kind of weirded me out when I read it originally, and same with Terminus as well. But you don't worry about that. You just go with the story. The storytelling and the writing is so magnetic. You just get pulled into the story. It's really immersive. So
what I would hate to do would be to invalidate anybody's original experience of the first novelization, because you read these things at a certain stage in your life, and they have an effect with you, and they stay with you.
Absolutely.
And for someone to come along and say, oh, the one that you loved all those years ago, forget about that. Here's this one instead. I'm not. I'm not a big fan of that kind of recutting. I went along to see Spielberg's revised version of Close Encounters, and I thought, oh, why did you do this? Because it's not as good as the first time around. So fortunately, he kind of reverted on that one, and I was able to get the Blu-ray of the original cut. But I wouldn't want to invalidate the experience of Warrior's Gate the first time around. So it's really nice that you couldn't immediately see the differences, because what I've really done is I've just kind of thickened and enhanced and deepened certain stuff from the first time around that had to be kind of thinned out. And you didn't necessarily get full measure the first time. You're just getting full measure of the same thing now.
Yeah, because
I hope.
Well, I think the word count requirement on the old Target novels was quite slim, wasn't it? I thought it must have been about 50,000 words, something like that, 50-ish. So it's not.
I forget precisely, but I do know that Christine Doniger, who was the editor at W.H. Allen, who were doing Target at the time, she actually got clearance because she'd already signed off on the first version of the novelization. She was happy with it, and she'd gone to the production department and says, I need some extra pages for this, and they'd agreed that, so it was going to be a slightly larger than usual novelization. And if you look at the photographs that Target have put out of all the books put together, Warrior's Gate is slightly thicker than all the others.
It is actually. I can confirm that it's actually thicker. But then, of course, you've got the 2 short stories at the end of it as well, haven't you? Which are the
you've got the
Kairos Ring.
You got the novella, with Romana and Laszlo, and then you've got the short story at the end,
the Little Book of Fate.
The Little Book of Fate, with the. Oh God, which Doctor is it?
Doctor.
I can never keep. I can never keep track of the numbers. The lovely thing about that is I went back and watched the the Doctor Who movie,
yeah.
again, the Paul McGann movie.
We watched it again, didn't we?
Yeah, which I'd seen once when it went out, and I thought, oh, all right then, and moved on. Obviously, nothing's going to come of this because it had already been decided that it wasn't going to go forward. But going back to it, I thought, this is bloody
it's all right,
good.
isn't it? Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, and everything that makes New Who work is kind of in there in embryo.
Exactly. It's a lovely bridge between the old and the new, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean that fantastic scene where the Doctor's at the opera and gets called in to revive the patient, and you've got the you've got the opera music and the billowing dress as she races down the corridor.
And a sort of turn of the
God
camera as well,
Almighty!
isn't it? It was Jeffrey Sachs, wasn't it? Very, very creative direction. Some nice transitions. It's from that perspective. But also, I think the story, is just so joyous. I mean, again, maybe originally when I first watched it, I thought, okay, wasn't quite what I expected. But then you get over that, and then you just enjoy it. And I think it's a lovely story.
Yeah, it's really good.
You do get the feel that everybody's having fun making it.
Exactly. Yeah. Which you,
but in the right way.
Yeah, exactly. Which you don't always get on Warrior's Gate when you watch that. I think you can sense some of the tensions. Well, I don't know. Do you sense it? There is a tension there, but it kind of adds to it because it's it's towards the end of Tom Baker's run, and we got the whole foreshadowing that Chris Bidmead threaded throughout the whole of that season, and it builds towards that sort of tragic doom of the Fourth Doctor, which sounds very grand and everything else, but it's not the most fun story, but there is comedy in it, but you have to kind of pick at it, isn't it? But
I mean I do feel the tension, but then again I'm kind of also remembering what it was like to be in the studio while it was being made, so it's that tension as much as anything, if not more than anything, in the story. And a lot of it was going over my head. I just knew that there was, people were hissing at each other under the breath, and I thought, oh God, these people all hate each other. What's going on? Nobody's having fun here.
Oh dear. But you know what? You've got innovative storytelling, the style of Doctor Who story that we hadn't really seen before.
Yeah.
And we've got some innovations from the production, from the directorial point of view. Again, I mean, it's Paul Joyce fighting against the system almost to stamp a creative vision on the piece that he feels it deserves, and getting knocked back for it. Like you're saying with you, writing a novel that does justice to the original story that the concepts and everything else that you wanted to expand on, and then getting knocked back by it as well. And it's probably it's probably easy to blame John Nathan Turner for that, but of course John is trying to straddle both ends, isn't he? He's trying to keep the creatives happy, and he was a very creative person from all perspectives, and he's also trying to keep the corporate suits happy as well. And in doing so, ends up being a target for everybody. So you got to feel for the guy there, really.
Oh yeah. There's no way I'm going to diss the guy who gave me the gig in the first place.
No, definitely not. But so going back to these short stories then, so what was the inspiration for those? Did you just kind of had the idea that you wanted to write a sequel, and again with the Eighth Doctor thing was, because I don't want to give too much away, but it is a real treat for Eighth Doctor fans, and of a certain time in the modern series kind of mythology as well. It kind of taps into that, but I will say no more. But
very good. Well, it was as simple as I was asked.
Fair enough. Steve, can you write us up another couple of chapters on this, mate? We got some space to fill, and you can string some words together, can't you? Was it like that?
I was always of the opinion that there was a missed opportunity with Romana and Laszlo to do the female Doctor that everybody talked about for so long.
Yeah.
There they were, a Time Lord and a companion, and the Gateway, which was essentially a TARDIS, where you could access any point in space or time from it. And there was your female Doctor from 1980, whatever it was, onwards, just waiting to be picked up. Never did anything with it until BBC Audio said, we're doing these 10,000 word novellas, is there anything you would like to do? At which point I thought, well, that's a starting point. What can I do with that? Where can I take it? And it's kind of a grit in the oyster kind of thing. Once somebody's kick-started it, then you start to think, well, what story do I want to tell here? Where do I want it to go? What do I want it to be? I think I had a couple of fragments of what became the opening scenes of the story that I'd started to write and not gone anywhere with, and it wasn't necessarily the Romana story that they were part of. But I took that and I put it together with the Romana and Laszlo situation, and then those two kind of fizzed together and started to generate more ideas. So that became the Kairos ring, and then Steve Cole said, "Well, we need something new, unpublished, uncirculated, to add to the book, just to give it that little bit of extra edge." Yeah. And my first thought was, well, a linking story between the two, perhaps. And then I thought, well, it doesn't need a linking story between the two. What does it need? It needs rounding off and bringing up to date. So there were limitations on what I could do with other Doctors because of what had been, and again, not to get too far into spoiler territory, there were other Doctors I could not use because of knowledge that the Doctor in my story needed to have, that was not allowed him in certain incarnations. So that's why I went to the TV movie, because that Doctor stood apart from the others to a certain extent. But of course, he has now been drawn into the modern mythology. So there are points of contact there. So what I did was I made a bridge between the start of that and the point of contact with the modern mythology, and that arc became what I tried to flesh out in that story. And as a result of wanting to do that, that's why I went back to the TV movie, and it was I was so pleased I did that, because I wouldn't have necessarily revisited it otherwise, and I'm so glad I did.
We watched it again recently, didn't we, for a podcast episode? It was great watching it again. It is so good. And we hadn't seen it in a while. Yeah, it's really good.
And McGann needs more recognition as well. I know he's done the Big Finish stuff and that, but
it was really.
And in fact, when it came to Chris Chibnall leaving off and the reboot, my thought would have been, what would my thought have been? No, I did have an idea for. I haven't thought this through, and I'm not going to give it away. So,
do you know, actually, on that, the last Doctor Who episode, the Power of the Doctor, Jodie Whittaker's final story. I mean, it was such a joy to see all the old, or as many of the old Doctors back in that as they could, and the Eighth Doctor, Paul McGann, joining the setup as well. It was an absolute. Because on the one hand, I was gutted when they didn't take the Eighth Doctor stories further. And you're right. The doom bell had already tolled before we even saw the episode, I think. And on the other hand, I was actually kind of pleased as well, because what looked like the kind of storyline or the direction we were going to go in, I didn't think I was going to really engage with it. I thought that's a bit too weird. But of course, it sparked off. Like you said, everything that the modern series has is there in embryonic form. So if we maybe hadn't had that, would we have had the revival? Because obviously in the UK, the Doctor Who movie was reasonably successful, wasn't it? So they realised that there was an audience still hungry for it, and a new audience to be gained from it. Yeah. And actually, going back to your story, that final short story in Warrior's Gate, the Little Book of Fate, is such a fabulous bridge, because happening where it does, and using Romana and Laszlo and the Doctor from the old series. So you've got that classic era, the end of the Fourth Doctor series, bridging nicely with the Eighth Doctor, and then of course into the new series as well. So I think any new fan, I say new fan, they're probably all in their 20s and 30s now, actually thinking about it, right? But for those who've only really engaged with the modern series, I would say go and visit this, because you will be delighted not only by the main story, Warrior's Gate, because it is a fabulous read, and the two short stories, but it's almost like the cherry on the cake is that last short story, the Little Book of Fate, which just gives it an extra ping. We need a sound effect, Jeff. A little ping, a little golden light. You know what I mean? It's brilliantly done, and congratulations, Stephen, and thank you for bringing that to us.
I wish.
Well, thank you very much, and your money's behind the radiator.
Nice one, lovely.
I haven't been able to read it yet. We only got sent one copy of each book, didn't we?
And it's mine. I'm holding on to it. It's right there, and there it stays, Jeff.
I'm so sorry.
We had a fight over who got which ones.
Yeah, we did. And I'm Bagsy Warriors Go. I'm over that one.
That's what Paul texted me. Yeah,
I do that. Yeah.
We've got a question here from Ian Banks on Twitter. who says, you've enjoyed a successful career across multiple media, radio, TV, novels, comics and audio. And he says he's read a few of your novels and really enjoyed them, so thank you for that. Has Doctor Who been a help or a hindrance for you in terms of your recognition as a writer?
Ooh.
Oh, thank you for that, Ian. I can only say it's been a help. I mean, you know, it's even more of a help now that Doctor Who has a more stellar reputation than it did back in the early days. There was a tendency for people to think of me as, you know, my television experience was as a writer on a kids' show. I didn't write for TV again for several years. I did an episode of a cop show called Rockcliffe's Folly.
I remember that, yeah.
Which worked quite well. You know, it was a spin-off of Rockcliffe's Babies. But that was just a kind of one-off freelance gig, not very much in my wheelhouse really, but it was a chance to show that I could do it professionally, to order, you know, to a series concept. Things didn't really work out for me until in TV, until I sold Chimera to TV.
Right, yeah.
And that as a 4-parter based on a novel with my fingerprints all over it from start to finish it kind of reset the dial, and that's the thing that kind of, you know, perfused the character of my career from that point onwards. And then, you know, as time went on, then people would pop up and say, "Oh God, what?" This was mainly after it was possible to get home versions of it, you know, VHS first, then DVD, and people started rediscovering it. And then I became not only the Chimera guy, but the Chimera guy who had once worked on Doctor Who. And that was kind of, you know, just an added flavour to the whole thing that was really satisfying for me, because, you know, everything I've done I own.
Yeah.
People would come up to me at Easter cons, and they'd have a copy of Saturn III, which is a thing that I novelised in 1979 during the ITV strike, when I was on strike and needed money. So I'd novelised the script that was nominally Martin Amis's, but apparently every screenwriter in town had taken a swing at it, including Frederick Raphael at one point, apparently. So, and they come up and they expect, you know, I've caught you out. Will you blush it? Oh, no, I'll sign you up, mate. No problem. Yeah. Okay. Don't think you're going to embarrass me with it.
Steve, did you ever meet anyone and you told them that you'd written Warrior's Gate, and they'd say, but it was written by Paul, and they, you know, they didn't believe you?
No, it's never. No,
really.
No, I think
John Lydecker.
John Lydecker.
Yeah, John.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Right. Yeah. No, I get offered the book to sign sometimes, and I always sign it twice. You know, once as me and once as John. And then if anybody's got copies of both novelizations, it's Steve and then John and then John and then Steve.
That makes sense.
Are they different signatures?
Well,
different names, Jeff. Obviously.
Well, yeah, but it's a style on John's different. You know. Yeah.
I've got a glass paperweight, so it's actually downstairs somewhere, but a glass paperweight that my sister-in-law had made for me as a birthday present one time, and it's the John Lydecker signature, sort of engraved in the glass. So, in case I ever forget how to do it.
Need to get a stamp for it.
Yeah, just do that. So last few questions then. So I can't let you go, Steve, without talking very, very briefly about Terminus, which again, actually, I really like, and another novelisation that I love because it just flows. So your experience in that, because was it better or worse, different? Because you obviously went back to Doctor Who. So in a nutshell, what was your experience writing that one?
It was different. I'd had a big whinge at John Nathan Turner after the whole Warriors Gate thing, because and my agent said, I wish you'd shown that to me before, because I would have stopped you. But you know, John's response to that was to commission me for Terminus. You know, say we'll take another one. In the meantime, Chris left and Eric Saywood came in as a script editor. So I was dealing with a new team there, Mary Ridge as director. And it was a more standard Doctor Who experience. It wasn't as chaotic as Warriors Gate. I was just as fond of the material and just as I delved into Norse mythology and various various other fields of research, and stole from medieval manuscripts and other visual sources as well, and also saw the production team take up all my suggestions and take it in their own creative direction. So from that point of view, it was a wholly satisfying experience. It didn't make the mark that Warriors Gate made, and it's not as beloved by fans as Warriors Gate is. But I do have to say that when you find somebody who does rate Terminus, they tend to rate it quite highly.
Yeah.
And I've had the experience a couple of times now of overhearing conversations where people didn't know I was in the room or didn't know who I was. Weren't even necessarily talking about Doctor Who, but they were talking about horror. And Terminus came up as their example of go-to horror for TV.
Really? That's interesting,
that's really
isn't it?
good.
Yeah.
That's
And that is very gratifying because it means that the volume of noise, is great, but the specificity of that appreciation. Yeah. Do you ever start a word?
Wish you never bothered.
Yeah.
Quite often.
Halfway through, you realise it's not going to come out the way you want it.
I think,
but that's just as gratifying in its way.
I think Terminus has got a lot going for him. And as I said, the only thing I really don't like is the cover, that particular cover. But again, it has a certain... because I bought it at a certain time in my life, and if they changed it, I know there are different covers, but it still means something. But the TV show itself, there is a lot to love. I mean, I know it's not necessarily your decision, but I love the music on it. I can't remember who did it, whether it's Roger Lim or somebody else, but it sounds very Vangelis-like. It is almost sounds to me like it's taken its inspiration from something like Blade Runner, for example. As those kind of soaring synthesized strings, kind of one note sort of up and down on the, and I love it. And it has, the whole thing has an atmosphere to it, which is very. I'm trying not to say cold, because it's not cold. It's full of character and it's full of personality, but it's cold in the sense that it's the environment is sterile, because it is like a hospital ship type thing, isn't it? But it's not quite that. There's something really unsettling about Terminus. Actually, that's what I'm getting at. That's the word, unsettling, which is always there every time I watch it. And every time I read the novel, it's like, I can't describe it. I don't have the vocabulary to describe it, to my shame, but. There's something about it that is very creepy.
Well, you've got this large empty ship, or apparently empty ship, and then on the other side of the skull doors, you've got this incredibly dark Narnia of suffering, and I do remember when the show was going out after the first episode, there was a letter in the Radio Times from the British Leprosy Association saying, you're giving leprosy a bad name. It's we fight all the time to kind of dispel the myths. And the thing is, if you go through to the end, that's what the show is about. The fact that here is an entirely curable disease that is stigmatized for other purposes. And Nyssa stays behind in order to do the work kind of in parallel to what the British Leprosy Society were doing. But they jumped the gun on that one.
Knee-jerk reaction, without sort of looking at it.
Can't blame them, but I wish they'd let me answer it though, because John Nathan Turner said, "Oh, we're just trying to make entertainment." And no, actually, John, there's
something
more
to be said,
than that.
And sometimes actually, when those questions are kind of raised, it's good to open the discussion rather than just shut it down, isn't it? I think to open those questions via a TV show that popular TV show that everybody engages with and loves is a good way to do it. The modern series does that quite well, but it's sad in a way that it was seen as all like shameful or misunderstood.
It was at a time when it was a show that was not taken seriously, and there was the joke about the wobbly sets and everything. And I've always said that people did not love Doctor Who for its wobbly sets. They loved it despite them.
And we love the stories. I think that's it.
Yeah,
I think.
you can look past any wobbles, and you can't judge the effects of the old stories by modern standards. But you have to look at them for what they were doing for the story and what they were telling of it.
Yeah.
Kids these days,
No idea.
Yeah.
So let's go to our final question from the Twitterverse then. So we got Paul Scoons at Paul Scoons asks, is there any chance we might see a novelisation of your scripts for the unmade season 21 story, The Nightmare Country? What do you reckon, Steve?
Well, hello, Paul, and it's never arisen, and I haven't been asked. And I suppose were I asked, I'd certainly consider it, but it's not something that I'm agitating to do. It was really, really nice to be able to do The Nightmare Country after all these years, because that was it was the pitch that I put in after Terminus, and that Eric Saywood responded to with, it's another $1 million movie and we just can't do them. And he was entirely right. It is a $1 million movie, but you can do a $1 million movie for audio.
Exactly.
So the lovely thing is that I got the cast that I would have had the first time round. Same people, same voices, same story, and I'd broken the story right into scenes and almost taken it as far as just writing the dialogue. So I had very little to do to take it from the treatment that had been rejected all those years ago to the audio version, and it was great fun to do. Whether I would have anything more to say on the story that I could add in a novelisation, or whether it would just be rather a case of adding visuals and adding a bit more vision, I don't know. But as I say, it's not necessarily on the cards, and I don't see it immediately being on the cards anywhere in the near future.
You never know.
You never know. I kind of think it would probably be a publishing decision, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
If they decided they wanted to go
do
into
the lost stories.
Lost stories. Yeah.
If you got asked, would you write for modern Doctor Who?
It would be, I'm sure I would. I mean, I haven't attempted to, and I haven't applied to, and I haven't agitated to, because modern Doctor Who, you don't go to them, they come to you. And I've always said, if you go to them and the answer's no, then it's an awfully long walk back to your seat.
Unless nobody knows that you asked them, no. Was it?
Well, yeah.
I think we were talking.
But I will know, as an old Who hand, it's different. Where I am a new writer looking to break in and looking to kind of escalate, then that would be different. It would be worth having a go and getting knocked back. But honestly, I've not got an idea to take to them. If I had an overwhelming idea, then there would be some conflict over that as to what do I do with it. But I don't. And what happened with the with the Kairos ring and with the Little Book of Fate was that I got kick-started. Somebody put a spark in and set me off. And without that spark, I don't know that I would have returned to the world at all. But with the spark,
there
we go.
That's all it needs.
If anyone's listening, and we know there will be people listening, and they've got an idea for Stephen, tweet it,
strike that flint together. So what are you working on now? What have you got lined up for the future?
I'm working on a movie for a German producer. Which is one of those things that again got stalled by COVID and has reawakened itself. We've got Faustine coming out in a few weeks, and we are talking about maybe doing more in the comics world, because I really enjoyed writing a comic script.
Did you?
Because it was 2 weeks of intensive work, and then a year of watching the artist do all the hard stuff. and it's Martin Geraghty who's kind of Doctor Who royalty in the comics world, and he's done a terrific job, and we'll all see that soon. But I would be quite keen to do a little bit more in that area, because it's a field that I'd not done anything in before. So it was just another part of the toy shop to play in.
Brilliant,
And the other thing is that 9-year-old project that I mentioned before, which has raised its head again. We're having a Zoom meeting on that next week with the New Zealand end.
That's exciting.
Which is where Paul Scoons is at the moment.
Indeed.
So that all ties together quite nicely.
So might be able to see him soon. You never know. Oh, that's fantastic. Stephen, thank you so much for joining us. You know, it feels like it's been a real privilege and an honour to have a chat with you in person, and thank you in person as well for coming out with Warriors Gate and as I said, boosting my engagement with the Doctor Who show, Doctor Who as a programme. You know, it was really quite formative for me. So it's an absolute pleasure, and thank you so much for your time, and good luck on all your projects.
Yeah.
No, it's been great fun.
Yeah,
thank you
very much. It's been brilliant.
You're very welcome. Listeners, join us very soon for another episode of Who Corner to Corner. In the meantime, make sure you do go out and grab yourself a copy of Warriors Gate and Beyond by Steve Gallagher, and of course all the other Target novels, because Target novels are quite frankly brilliant. And if you don't buy them, then there's something wrong with you. And anyway, there you go. So that.
I believe they're all out on July 13th, so by the time this one comes out, that will be in probably 2 weeks after this episode comes out.
There you
so
go.
perfect timing to head over to your favourite bookstore and get your order in.
Or even your non-favourite bookstore. You
you could do that.
Bookstore you hate, doesn't matter. You know. I hate this bookstore, but I want that book.
Yeah. Mix it up
Brilliant.
a bit.
Thank you, listeners.
Thanks, everyone.
We will see you again next time. Bye for now.
Bye.